Okay, we're back and our paint has dried here now. So let's get started on the chipping. And just as a quick review to kind of how we got to where we are right now. We began with the rust color that we put as a base color underneath this over the primer. Then we sealed that with this invisible layer of gloss coat that's right here. That's protecting this layer down here. Over that we've sprayed this chipping solution or hairspray. And over that we've painted our green color. So now we're ready to move to just pure water, and we're going to do a little bit of scrubbing, and we'll start to reveal these layers that are underneath this green color. So remember before we talked about my old brushes, which I don't have terribly many of my old brushes here with me today, but I'm going to use a couple of brushes. It can be different shapes, different sizes, whatever you want to use, including we can make scratches with the little toothpicks and whatever else is handy. But we're just going to get started with kind of a medium-sized brush here, just to kind of get things started. So kind of the trick is here, we need to kind of activate the area. So we're just going to put a little bit of water here. It's not a lot. I'm going to put a little bit of a paper towel right here. So what we're looking for, and you can see it right here, it's just starting.
Yeah, you barely touched it, yeah.
Yeah, so what we've got now, the water is activating the hairspray, the chipping solution underneath, and it's starting to lift it up. Now, if I was going to rub very aggressively, I could take off large sections at a time, but I don't want to do this. I want this to be somewhat subtle and realistic in scope here and in size. We're always paying attention to the size, the scale of what we're doing, the effects that we're doing. The other thing we want to really pay attention to is to make this in logical places.
Right.
You know, if we put a bunch of chipping up here, we have to decide, how did that happen? What in real life would have caused a lot of chipping to happen up here? Well, you know, we could probably come up with a story of why that happened, but we know for certain that the crew member is going to walk up and down and get on and off this thing all day long. So we can chip this back just confident that this is an area that, in fact, in real life would have had lots of abuse. And notice I'm working in small areas at a time. Now this area had been flooded with water and it started activating. And then this area here I hadn't yet, but I just added a little water to it just to kind of start moving in that direction. I don't know if you can see the amount of pressure I'm putting on this right now is actually fairly light. So you can see I'm using kind of a stippling motion here. I'm just kind of flaking off the paint. And you can see my surface is almost dry again because I'm not really adding a lot of water. If this gets real sloppy and messy, I'm going to lose control, and that's something I don't want to do. I want to.
Okay, yeah, this is a little bit different than we did in Lucas Zampriola's video, which is we used a toothbrush, which obviously would be way too aggressive.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's a good point though. Not every time the chipping solution comes off this easily. Partly it's due because we've got that clear coat underneath it, and it's so the hairspray or the chipping solution is on a slippery surface,
right?
And so it doesn't have a lot of adhesion right there, so it promotes the chipping effect. But so there are certain cases, and I certainly run into them where
I like this method, and I'll tell you, and the reason is because you don't have to be so aggressive, and you can do it much more in a controlled method.
Yeah,
you can really control the amount and scale of the chipping. I remember when we had done it with a toothbrush, it was just kind of like, well, I hope this works kind of approach, you know.
Yeah. And what's kind of interesting, if you care to follow my my philosophy of this, I mentioned earlier that when I paint more in a sketch manner. That's pretty broad strokes, pretty loose. Well, right now, you could tell I'm actually more concerned about control. You know, I could take if I took a big brush and started going up and down this thing, I could remove all this paint in 2 strokes, but that's not my intention. And I've got this little winch back here, which we'll end up painting a little bit later, but they're working back here, so I'm going to get some water on here, and we'll start working that section as well. And what we'll do is we're just going to slowly but surely work our way around this vehicle and add effects, this chipping effect, wherever we think it's appropriate. Now, as long as we're talking about chipping in general here, if you're an armor modeler, you certainly know this, but I think it applies to everything else too. In the broad sense, there's a big debate that comes up from time to time about what's appropriate, how much is too much. Everybody does it, but it's not realistic, you know. And so this goes back to my story, you know. Doesn't make sense for what we're doing right now. Sure, if this was a brand new tractor off the tractor lot, of course there would be no chips on it. But the story I'm telling is about a captured workhorse. This vehicle is probably in service before the war, was taken by the Russian troops. They used it for a while, captured by the German troops. They're using it. Poor maintenance, no servicing. It's been used and abused. That makes sense for this particular one. But what I'm also being very careful of, which has been pointed out, is that these chips are very small. They're to scale. Keep in mind this is 1/35th, so the guy's foot is only about this big across here. So that is in scale with somebody who had scuffed off that part of the surface.
Right.
And that's what you want to make sure that you always keep in mind. And again, where does it make sense? This makes sense over here. It probably doesn't make sense in some other areas. So I'm not going to use this technique all over the entire vehicle. I'm going to do it selectively. We have other chipping processes. I'm going to spin this around real quick. Let's do the other side. We have other chipping processes that we can do, that we can add chips of a different type that we'll do later on different sections, because not all chips are the same. You know, these are scuffing type chips. So we'll do it this way, where we've got a scratch. I can actually demonstrate a little bit. Let's say something got drug across this surface here. They had a big piece of equipment and they took it across. Well, we can simulate that by just doing this. So now we've got a scratch across here. And then we can actually pull back a little bit of the chipping fluids. So now we've got a scratch. We've still got our scuffs going on here.
Right.
So it's a pretty versatile system. And again, you certainly have a lot of control. Let's say they brought, you know, let's say they ran into some, we're going to, just a moment, we're going to dampen this area here that hasn't been dampened yet. Let's say they ran across some bushes and they scratched the heck out of the front of this thing. So he went down, and keep in mind they're traveling, so your scratches are going to go in a linear manner down the side here. And those branches just took a beating up here. And the reason I moistened it first is kind of get it activated. It's not necessary even to do that, but now you can see as I start revealing, that part where I scratched reveals earlier because I've already broken the surface. Mm-hmm. And now those scratches are running down here. And I think that looks fairly convincing. And so I'm just going to continue along here. I want to make sure, here's where I need to get inside these places. You know, this guy's foot is down here all the time. So this part here is going to be very well worn down because he's stomping on this all day long. So I want to get in here. And like I said, now see, this part isn't revealing quite as easily as those edges were. And that's probably because it's down in here and I didn't get the fluid in there quite as evenly. And so I might have paint on paint going here rather than paint with that barrier. Mm-hmm. But I can, you know, I'll keep working on it for a second and see if I can get it to activate. And if not, we can get around this. And sometimes even, you know, we may have hoped that we could get this kind of effect back here, mm-hmm. but we're not. So, but that doesn't necessarily look unrealistic, and it certainly gives us that canvas to start doing something different on that may, you know, work to our benefit later on. So these are the kind of little happy things we're looking for. A little bit of randomness under controlled circumstances to get this to reveal itself. We're just working on our canvas here. That's looking okay in my eye. So down along these bottom edges here, of course, we're going to have rocks and dirt and mud and branches and wear and tear kick up here. So we're going to go ahead and activate some of this area as well. I'm really concentrating on that bottom edge. Yeah, that's where it's really taken some beating there and kind of come upwards. I'm doing that for two reasons. One, it's logical, and two, the reveal of this dark color along this edge helps give me some definition to this particular piece. Right. So, you know, as we go through this process, that really the next step, we're going to start adding a lot of our definition, our shadows into this thing.
It's very different than the salt and hairspray technique, and I'm sure you're aware of the salt and hairspray technique. Mm-hmm. And actually, in our tutorial with Luca, we did somewhat similar to what you did, except we also used salt. And I guess the reason is that the the salt comes off a lot more freely than this. You don't have to, I guess, be so thorough with the surface. It just kind of comes off in one quick pull, I guess you could say. But you don't like the salt. Have you used the salt method before?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay,
I've
so
used
what is the advantage of this method versus the salt method?
For this is greater control. As you can see, I'm putting chips and scratches exactly where I want them, and I think you'd be hard pressed to get a fine line of chip along this edge here, as if it was opening and closing, with the salt method. It's just very difficult to get your salt to lay on that, even if you moistened it and did all those things. Right. Salt is a fantastic method for showing real aggressive wear, big peels of paint, things like that. So in this area here, we know that this is going to be pretty much beat up because it's inside the tracks. It's basically made for rocks and dirt to fall on it and get put off to the side. So we're going to take a bigger brush here and we're just going to almost reveal a whole bunch of the rust underneath. We'll just chip this back as such. We can be, we got some rocks that came down and made some scrapes down the side here. And we'll come back and we'll just see what that looks like. I'm changing brushes to a smaller brush now because I got a big patch right here which looks fine, but I want to make sure I get these edges down here, but I don't want to keep, I want to keep some nice green parts in here, so I want a little finer brush so I can control where my pressure is. So these are those scratches I put in. I'm just kind of getting those to pull out a little bit. Now we're going to come back in a few minutes and we're going to add some different types of stuff in here. And honestly, I know where I'm going to go with this model. There's going to be a lot of dirt accumulated on these surfaces as well. So doing a lot of chipping in here eventually probably get covered up anyway. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like up here. Again, old piece of equipment, found materials, perfect for a bunch of rust and weathering.
This is actually a perfect argument for using the chipping solution, is because if you use the various kinds of hairsprays, you never sometimes know how it's going to react, and so you might get to this stage and be like, oh, I should have used something from Tresemme versus, you know.
Which actually Tresemme is actually one of the brands I've had more success with.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you may end up in that kind of, you know, scenario where it's just not working for you, or if it just comes off in a very bizarre way. We've had experiences with that in past tutorials off screen where we're like, uh-oh, we got to go back to the drugstore and redo this whole section because this hairspray is not reacting right. So yeah, it would be unfortunate for you guys at home to kind of experience that. So a good idea is to go get this chipping solution because it will react as, like you said, in a predictable manner.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and slide over to the engine real quick, and like I said, I want to take this quite a ways back to black, and then later on we're going to end up picking out a lot of these details with the brush. But right now, you can see I'm just I'm really aggressively activating this section. I'm literally, you know, flooding this area with water because I want this to come off in sheets.
Right.
So I'm just kind of saying, here we go, and getting this all wet. Now, as I go through this, I have to be careful with my wires and stuff because they're only just super glued on there. So now we're chipping this back fairly aggressively. And it's going to look like an engine that's really had some wear and tear on it. And when you stop is really up to you. You know, just take it as far as you feel like. Especially on a place like this. This could just be a totally beat the heck engine. I may have not got solution in there very well. That's fine. We'll work on that later. This is the roof. I'm going to broad stroke this, and we'll see what we get. So this is on a horizontal surface. There's not going to be a lot of like foot traffic and things that cause scrapes and stuff, but it will just kind of, you're going to have like sun wear and fading, and it'll start cracking in a corner and work its way across. One thing when you're working on models is you really want to start paying attention to everyday life. Go by a construction zone, someplace where heavy equipment's working, if you're working on, say, armor, and see where the dirt accumulates, see where the grease and oil stains are, see how rust accumulates, where it accumulates. Even if it does accumulate, a lot of times people put rust on places that really shouldn't have rust. So kind of like that. So okay, we'll call that one good right now. Okay, so the last little piece we need to work on is back here on the rear of the vehicle, and we'll just put some heavy chips along the places that we know are very exposed. In my mind, I've finished with this type of technique right now, although we could always come back and reactivate it and do certain areas again. But I want to move on because I don't want to do the whole chipping process using that single method. I want to vary it up a little bit, as if different things have affected the finish on this vehicle. So the two other methods that I prefer to use beyond this one are simply with the paintbrush, and now we're bringing back that Series 7 miniature brush that I really like, the one that I invested some money with. And the other way is to do it with a Scotch-Brite pad similar to this. And we'll do both of them. I'll start with the Scotch-Brite pad first. Let me riff off a little piece, and then I'll get that ready. I'll talk about that in a second. Just as important as your brush in this step is a good selection of paints. And when I say good selection of paints, I mean paints that are made for brush painting. And two of the better companies, in my mind, for doing that are the Vallejo brand and the Life Color brand. These two colors of paints, or two brands of paints, are excellent for brush painting, and that's what you want. Versus the Tamiya paints, which we were using earlier, which are better for, or good for, I should say, airbrushing, but not very good for using a regular paintbrush on. So you kind of want to avoid that if possible. So let me start this out, and let's go ahead and one of the more universal colors that we use for chipping is this German Camo Black Brown from Vallejo. It's a real nice, rich, dark brown. Simulates like a bare metal finish incredibly well. Usually these things just squirt out, but my paint bottles are old and doesn't want to do that, so I'll just do that instead. And sometimes I'll just add a slight mix of a rusty color to it. In this case, it's going to be a mahogany brown. We want a little bit of an orange tint maybe. So I've got those two colors going, and notice I'm not going to thin them out right now because I actually want this to remain thin, but what I'll do is kind of mix these two colors together slightly. Now I've got a nice chip color right there. And I don't want too much because I'm not trying to paint with this, I'm just trying to blot with this. So what I'll do is make a test piece right here. I'll go like this, take some of it off, and you can kind of see the pattern it leaves right there. Real nice and fine. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so I've got some paint on here. Kind of wipe it off a little bit there, and I'm just going to blot. And you can see those chips are starting to come up here. And just keep working this corner. Like I said, this is a very good method to show just a lot of repeated wear and tear. And notice my color is slightly different than what I've used up on top here. It shows a little bit different age of the chip. These might be older chips, a little bit darker, or maybe newer chips. It's just kind of something different. But this area down here where we were having the problems with before because the chipping solution didn't want to work, we'll just take care of it right now. So along the bottom here, we'll just kind of add some light chips where rocks have kicked up and scrapes have happened and such. And there we go. Kind of chip up those corners. That's really nice and chipped up now. And I'm going to spin this around and work the same thing on the other side. So kind of.
Yeah, it gives you a much more feeling of a thick piece of metal.
Yeah.
thick slab of metal.
Yeah, a lot of that is the color that we're using. That camo black brown is good. A little bit of rust into it, the little orangey color, helps a lot. And we'll keep accentuating that. We'll, again, you make a good point that we want this to simulate what it is. If this was a piece of plastic, we'd be doing something different with it to make it, say this was made out of fiberglass. We'd use totally different colors. We might use some of the same techniques, but our colors would really be different. And that's what we want to do, is we want to use the colors and the techniques that are appropriate for the type of material that we are using. And here, on this nice plate, we'll go ahead and have some of these types of scratches along with those scratches. We're just building layers. But see, this one here, I'm able to highlight that edge there quite a bit because it's just picking it up right on that high point. And we'll do these little wheel covers here, like that. And if you remember, we were having problems chipping along this back section over here. We'll just set that right there. This probably got pretty well beat up because this is sitting back there. They're hooking things onto it and whatever. So we're just going to kind of go in there on that. And this post here is. And kind of the neat thing about this type of method is, like you can see here, it hits the high points, the points that you would actually have more wear and tear anyway, the more exposed areas. So this kind of does it in a natural sort of way. It's taking care of it for you. Mm-hmm. So let's repeat some of these processes up here. We're getting there. So along these corners up here, those probably got nicked a little bit of wear, taking that hood on and off maybe. So again, we're going to use the raised edge, and we're going to kind of follow this around, and hopefully we'll get more along that edge to show that thing opening and closing over time. Accentuate that line coming across there. And then we can do the same thing on this side over here. Let's bring this around. Just nice, fine little chips. This corner got hit a little bit harder. A few chips right in there. Of course, this guy's been walking in and out and banging the corner here. Something like that. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of cheating again here. I'm laying these colors along these back sides here, which is giving me my definition to these particular parts. So now we've got a little bit of a black line or a darker line which outlines this radiator piece or outlines this gas tank piece. So I'm letting the chips kind of, I'm using the chips, I should say, to kind of help me get definition. But in the interest of not wanting to overdo the chipping, I may stop pretty close to here. Actually, I'm going to, basically what I'm doing, I'm going from what was a brown, remember the camo black brown? I'm going to switch that a little bit from a brown base to a gray base. And I do that from time to time just to kind of, again, it shows different age of the chips as much as anything. And since I'm working with the light colors, I'll stay with the light colors and add this rusty color to the mix. There we go. So I'll just kind of add some more chips in this area with that color. I also wanted to add some more right along this edge here. This didn't seem to find enough for me. So I'll do that. Spin around and do this. I'm just going to add a few chips along here. Again, this is mostly just a definition thing. I'm not wanting to put a ton on here with this method. I'm going to probably change to something a little bit different. I'm just going to let that kind of sit like that. I want to be kind of gentle with these chips. I don't want this particular piece. I want some contrast, I should say. So if I have an area that's got a lot of heavy chipping, I'll put an area that's not quite so heavily chipped right next to it. So the third type of chipping we'll do on this model is with the brush, this famous series number 7 that I keep talking about. And this is for making fine chips that we're actually going to do by hand. In my palette here I've got a green color and that German camo black brown. And in this case, I'm actually going to use a little bit of water. Not so much that I want a thin paint, but I do need to mix these together. So what I'm going to do is kind of, in my palette, mix some paints together. And the reason I'm using a green color is because now I'm going to start showing different aged scratches, but these scratches are going to be different. These are real scratches versus chips. And so these are going to go in kind of like a linear motion, like something's drug along the side here. And you can see what I'm doing is that these are very, very faint. And that's okay, because all we're doing is showing Mars on the paint. We're just showing like where it's scuffed, where something's drug up against it. A lot of times I'll just do kind of little random things like this. But what you'll notice here is I'm doing it purposely on this rounded corner, right on the edge where it would happen naturally. But also, once again, it's helping me define this shape. So we've got, you know, parts down here that are on the flat surface. I'll chip around here where this might be banged into quite a bit because it's got a little bit of a raised edge. I'll spin this around. But again, I'm just kind of coming around this edge here, nice and easy. And I'm kind of working, you know, see I'm kind of working, it's just touching, it's not touching. I kind of almost call it dancing. I'm just kind of moving my brush from side to side. Like that, come down, 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 like that. Kind of accentuate this area here, because we know that chipped probably close to the edge where this guy, you know, banged this thing when he's opening and closing this thing. So now you can see these chips are starting to look fairly realistic. Along this raised edge here, well, that's an exposed area, so we know that that's going to get a little bit of chipping involved on that too. Some, you know, just for the fact that it's raised, exposed to the elements, promotes a little bit of wear. Okay, so I'm just kind of hitting these corners up here. And I'm, you know, I can tell, I know in my own mind, I'm risking that, I'm getting to that point where I'm about ready to overdo it. You know, I don't want to do every surface. It's a lot of fun. Every time I do this, it's adding something to the model. I mean, I think this corner is starting to look pretty interesting. I think there's a lot going on here. It'd be fun to put some more chips over here because they're fun to do, but I think, you know, this is like music, you know, the spaces in between are just as important as all this busy work around the corner here, so I want to make sure I preserve all that.
And by the way, I just want to mention that we did change the bolts. You guys may be wondering what the heck happened down there. Earlier on, I guess we forgot to mention it to you guys. It was just like we kind of slept on it, and then we woke up in the morning, and then Rick just went off on his own. Before I got to the camera, and then Rick just kind of, I guess it was bothering you.
It was bothering me.
Right.
All I did, just to explain, I had a 4-bolt pattern right here, and I just decided to put more of a bolt that looked like it could be locked differently. It just didn't look right to me. It's a little heavier bolt. That's all I did.
Okay.
Same way as we did the other bolts. I just, you know, 2 round discs on top of each other.
Right.
Okay, as you can see, I'm bracing myself against the model itself, and then I just let my fingers do the walking here. I don't want my hand to move. I'm just going to use my fingers, and I'm just getting a little bit of wear around that cap because those guys have been using that. And then this part here, I need to add some definition here. It's just kind of, from where I'm sitting, it just kind of walks away into limbo. So I'm going to come back in here and just put a few chips here. And then there is a raised detail surface here, which we'll come back in and we'll do those washes, and that'll pick that up like crazy, but we'll just add something here just so people know, hey, there's something there. Right. There you go. So these armrests here, we know that those are going to be chipped up like crazy, so we're just going to, we can be pretty aggressive on this. This guy's just a beast. These are all just banged up. And we'll take care of that to make them even look better. Same with these handrails right here, these little grab handles. I'm going to add a little bit of these greener chips along here and give it a little bit more direction because I want to kind of show some scraping. You know, some big branch came up and banged into this thing. And then we got back here that I need to address because we can't really get in here with those other techniques. So I'm just going to get in here, chip up these corners. And you can see, okay, you can see that this thing in real life pivots back and forth. So we're going to replicate that. We're just going to put some pivot lines in here where it's come across the surface. So it's worn the paint away here. And we'll keep working on that, and we'll dress that up. That's just the start. We can actually, I'm adding a little bit of a Vallejo mahogany right now to this mix. Not the best in the world, but it will do for rock and roll.
Right.
And we're going to be adding so many different other effects onto this that once we get done, this will, you'll say, oh, there's this scraping thing. It'll just make sense to you. Right now we're focused on it, so it looks a little awkward.
Right.
But we can keep working on that. So as long as I got this kind of mahogany color in my brush, I'm going to go ahead and add some more actual real rusty kind of effects here on this back tail. I think this piece here could really, this thing just gets exposed and beat the heck back here. It's probably just made out of some metal, so
right.
We're just gonna.
And I know it looks a little bright going on. It's because it's wet, but when it dries, it should.
Yeah. It does. It does dull quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, and then this wheel here, even though the track's going to be here, I know this edge here might be a little exposed, and some rock banged into these. So we're really about there. Okay, so now we've got our chips on here. We've done the sponge method, the chipping fluid, and a little bit with the brush. And I mentioned earlier on when we were doing this that we're going to kind of want to give some depth to these finishes, a little bit of aging. And one great way of doing that is to do a quick acrylic wash. And what I've done here is added some green color, since we have a green base, and then some light color, a buff again, to this using the Vallejo colors. And it's super runny. This is almost just like dirty water. That's what I'm looking for. And what we're going to do is just real quickly, I'm going to have actually a towel right off here to the side here. Real quickly, we're just going to paint this on, paint this off. Just kind of spread it around. But what you'll see is as this dries, one, we're kind of lightening the color slightly, and we're fading it, almost like a sun fade effect. But once this dries, you'll notice that the chips have kind of recessed into the background. They look like they're part of the finish now. Okay, so as this dries, you'll notice those chips will become part of the finish. They won't be, you can kind of keep an eye on this area, maybe right here, where those chips look very pronounced. They're right on top. So we'll do this, and as it dries, you'll notice that they kind of fade to the background. And that's exactly what we're looking to do.
And what's that diluted with water, about 5-to-1 or something?
Yeah, at least.
Okay.
Literally, it's just dirty water, just colored water. And of course, you could change the color mix on this too. If you say you wanted to bring out more of a yellow tint, put a little yellow into this mix as well, which is a great idea actually. So and this just kind of keeps working the way around here. So I'm going to kind of cover all surfaces like this because I really want these chips to unify. And this is the first step in that process. And right here. Let's see how this is doing, if it's starting to dry yet to get that effect.
How many layers would you say that you have to do before these filters, would you say is too much? Like I see you putting on like about, you're painting on, you're painting off. Would you just keep doing that, waiting for it to dry, paint on, paint off, or just like about a layer is enough?
Usually about a layer at this stage is enough. I'm just really just trying to knock the freshness of these chips off. And like I said, it adds a little bit of, because I've used a light buff color to add to this green, anytime you add a white or a buff or a cream to your colors, it will fade your paint. It'll give the illusion of faded paint. And I want that on this particular piece as well. So, but I don't want to go too far with that right away because I'm just really looking to fade the chips back, nothing more. So you can see I'm not really, the paint is so thin that I'm not really painting, I'm just kind of moistening, dampening.
Right.
I kind of you want to be a little bit careful about, here's a perfect example. This little mark right here, I want to be careful of that. Those will cause tide marks if they,
right.
A ring.
Dry. Yeah.
Yeah, if they'll just basically get a water stain. So I want to make sure I wash those all away. So the thin paint itself helps make sure that doesn't happen. But also I'm keeping my eye on this stuff so it doesn't do that. Now this chip here that we had that was really pronounced before, it looked out of place. You'll see that kind of bury back in there now, like it's, see it,
Right.
that paint, the white color of the paint's actually collecting on the corners of the two different paints that we put on there. So actually that looks like a little bit of a paint chip. You got a little bit of a white.
Yeah.
See, now those chips are starting to bury down in there. They're starting to recess underneath. And that's exactly what we're looking for, including like these funny little stains we put back here. You'll see them just start to be more like scuffs. And in this area back here where we're having that little bit of difficulty trying to get those to look like they've been there, like they're had a purpose, this will help do that. And what I'm doing with my brush when I take it off camera is a lot of times I'm actually just loading it with water. I've got color on, but I want to make sure I'm moving the paints around, so I'll just go get a little bit more water. And now I'm actually blotting out the color, so I'm picking it up.
Yeah, before it makes those title moves.
Yeah, I'm picking it up and then I'm wiping off my brush and picking this up. So you can see the scrape here now. It's starting to look a little more realistic. It doesn't look like it just doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't look like it was just painted on there. Now it looks like it's chipped the paint away. But this is the first step. So what I'm doing here is I got a little bit of white. I'm changing my color slightly. I got a little bit of white, and I've added some blue gray to this, because what I want to do is I want to get up here to this boom that we worked on, and following the same principle. Since we're doing green on green, I'm going to do kind of a blue gray on the blue gray. It's thinner than this photograph. It's starting to make it look super watery. I'm just going to apply this on here, and these chips here will just start coming straight back into the surface. The other nice thing about this is too, remember how we were trying to get these gradients of color throughout here? This will help enhance these. These will actually brighten the white spots here, so this will become more and more pronounced. But we're blending them together, so now it's just kind of a natural progression as it kind of weaves in and out of dark and light and dark and light.
Right.
And because I'm not scrubbing, and I'm using a soft brush, and I'm just basically just a topical application, I'm not really in fear of re-aggravating the chipping fluid.
I think I understand what you're saying. That they kind of, not only they kind of get kicked back a little bit, but because now there's another layer of material over top of them, you can kind of get that subsurface scattering going on. Where it's like you're seeing that kind of color from underneath, but the light is being scattered because the light has to pass through this thin membrane of a material that's over top of that surface.
Right, exactly.
So it gives that kind of deepness to it.
Yeah, and what I've done right here off to the camera while we were talking is I've made just a slight mix using a rust color, Vallejo color mixed with a little bit of white. And we're going to go ahead on these lower surfaces here. We're going to start really getting these to looking like they've gone through a little bit of wear. So right over the green this time. So this is where we can actually change the colors a little bit. I'm just going to accentuate these areas down here where we know we're going to do some heavy weathering, so we've got like permanent staining going on here. So add the rust over those areas. Now we're getting into the realm of filtering, and I'll talk about filters here for a second. When we talk about filters, those are something that actually changes the color of the base, and one easy way to kind of visualize that is if you can visualize a camera and you got your lens and you put a red filter over your lens, it kind of changes everything you see through that red filter, or a green filter or a blue filter. And that's kind of what we're going to start doing now to prepare this surface. The reason we do that, one, we're kind of burying chips, but we've kind of done that with this acrylic layer, but we're going to do it with an enamel layer in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and do that same chip burying step here with this. Again, the blue-gray over the blue-gray. And these should just kind of drop back a little bit further. But the reason we want to use a filter is that we're going to start adding levels of interesting color to this base again. So now we've done it, it's kind of like the second wave of this color interest thing that we're on. First wave was simply airbrushing in kind of a cloud pattern, using different colors slightly to change and give some visual interest. And now we're going to do some filters, and the filters are going to be fairly localized. So we'll use little browns and little greens So once again, we're kind of staining the color base. And then lastly, we'll come back with some oil paints and repeat that process. And between all three of them, we'll end up with a base color that's got a lot of interesting effects going on that are all very, very, very subtle. So the eye just kind of notices something's going on, but you can't really put your finger on what's going on.
Yeah,
and that's what
nuance.
we're looking.
We usually call that nuance.
Nuance. That's a great name. Got to learn that word. So I'm going to let this dry for a second, but we can kind of piece this together and kind of see how things are starting to play. Just so we start seeing how the colors are starting to match up and work together, or not work together actually, if that's the case. But these seem to be doing okay. So this needs to get a little bit of pressure. We'll knock that down in there. So that's how this is starting to work together. You can see we've got some good chipping and stuff going on here, but what we still see here is that this is very flat. There's not a lot of definition to this piece yet, and we're going to get to that next. I'm going to put some color filters on this. I'm going to let this acrylic dry for just half a second while I'm talking, and then we're going to put some color filters using enamels on here, and then we're off to this oil paint section, which is really going to start giving us our definition that we're looking for.